Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Very Cold Lasagna podcast, your place for all those filthy casual takes on the world of sports. I'm your host, DylanLasagna. This is episode number 188 of this icy yet spicy sports podcast. And it's a new month. Yes, it is. It is the month of March. And here on Very Cold Lasagna, that means it's the beginning of our annual tradition, which means that is NFL season recap month. It is the beginning of our annual tradition that is 2023 NFL season recap month. So what does that mean? Well, we're going to be talking about all 31 teams in the National Football League. But wait a minute, you're missing a team. No, I'm not. No, I ain't. No, I'm not. We already talked about that team. Or maybe we didn't. Maybe we didn't. But actually, we did, in actuality. Nonetheless, all joking aside, we begin our annual tradition that is NFL season recap month, talking about all 31 teams in the span of around 5 to 6 episodes in the month of March. That also could expand to April, but your ears, your digest may vary. But we'll see. We'll see how we go along the way in this journey in our little March Madness here on Very Cold Lasagna. And I'm excited. I'm excited to revisit the NFL season once more, even though it ended about 2 or 3 weeks or so ago. And of course, the most unfortunate way imaginable, at least for me. I don't know about you, but how are you all feeling? For all my football fans out there, it's been quite some time since the NFL has ended, at least the annual tradition of it. And we're still waiting for football to come back, which is about 6 months from now. 6 months from actually next week. So still a little bit of a waiting period. So I don't know what you're doing, but you can let me know in the comments whether it's you're watching this on a video or audio, what have you. So anyway, before we get into the swing of things with our first batch of teams that we're going to be talking about in our season recaps, let's actually break it down. What exactly is NFL season recap month here on Very Cold Lasagna? For those of you that are new to this, that have never come across Very Cold Lasagna, in a nutshell, actually the very simple gist of this, Very Cold Lasagna's NFL season recap month is, like I said, all 31 teams covered in the span of March. Like I said, it could also go into the month of April, depending on how we do. It's divided up into 5 to 6 episodes, going from the worst to the best of the NFL in the NFL draft order. So from the first overall pick to the 31st overall pick. And why you're probably saying, well, why there's 31 teams, 32 teams in the NFL. Why are you only talking about 31? Well, full disclaimer, all joking aside, I already talked about my team, and that was my San Francisco 49ers in the last episode. So that was like a little prologue, prelude to the first part. Yes, the first part of our season recaps. So go check out that episode after this one. So anyway, we're going to divide this up by 6 teams per episode, where we talk about all the positives, the negatives of their season, and just take a look at what's going on in their off seasons and what I personally feel like, what each of these teams needs to do to try and have a better next season, which is 2024, this year, in September, later on this year. But as we get deeper into these season recaps, as we talk about the rest of the teams later on in the month of March, we're going to focus more on what the back half of these teams had already done in free agency, maybe some upcoming stuff, what they still need to address once the new league year, the NFL's new year starts in a couple of weeks. So that's basically what we do here on NFL season recap month. Some people may do it different, but here in Very Cold Lasagna, I'm just a filthy casual fan. I might get stuff missed, get something hit, whatnot. So you can roast me. You can point things out along the way. So there you go. Now, a little bit of housekeeping before we get into our first team of our NFL season recaps. Follow me on social media on X and Instagram at Very Cold Lasagna. If you're listening to this on audio, if you're audio only, whether it's on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, whichever podcast platform Very Cold Lasagna is available on. Make sure you rate and review the show 1 to 5 stars. Leave me some feedback however you can. And if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you smack the like button, smack the subscribe button, leave a comment down below, especially with your own takes on each and every topic that I'm talking about in every episode, whatever topic that is. In terms of this episode, it's the teams that I'm going to be talking about in our season recaps. And share this with your friends, share this with a stranger, share this with your neighbors, share with whoever you want to share this with, whether it's the good or the bad about Very Cold Lasagna. But enough about me jibber-jabbering. Let's get into the first 6 teams. And, well, these are the worst of the worst, went into Dumpster Town, the annual residents of D-Town Down of Dumpster Town, as we take a look at the first batch of our 2023 NFL season recaps. So here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Here we go. So the first unfortunate soul in our 2023 NFL season recap month is none other than the 2-15 Carolina Panthers. For the Carolina Panthers, man, I thought that for this team, they looked like they were going to stay at least a little bit competitive, despite what was likely going to be rebuilding 2023. They were a decent team, coming up just short of winning the NFC South in 2022. You know, you had Sam Darnold. You had a team that fired their head coach, Matt Rule, the fool. A quarter way into the season, Steve Wilkes did a decent job having this team compete in a crappy NFC South that Tom Brady and the Bucs were letting slip away, but unfortunately just came up just short. So the Panthers came about a game short of trying to steal away the NFC South from Tom Brady and the Bucs in 2022. So they're going to 2023. They didn't retain Steve Wilkes. And, well, during the offseason, they pretty much changed just about everything around the team. From the head coach in Frank Reich, who was ousted from Indianapolis. And they pretty much put all their chips, like literally all their chips. They were placed at the 9th overall pick. But then they went to go all in, to go all the way up to the 1st overall pick, to go and get the top quarterback prospect that this time last year in Alabama's Bryce Young. So it was an interesting decision by many. I can't really remember how I exactly prospected, in quotations, Bryce Young, but nonetheless, it seemed like they got some help for their guy in free agency too. And I thought that, despite how they structured their roster, I thought they could contend and rebuild because, well, they were in a very crappy division that was the NFC South. I mean, just look at the Bucs, just look at the Saints, just look at the Falcons. I mean, they didn't exactly have good off seasons as well. The South was a very crappy division. Probably was going to be the worst division in my eyes when I previewed them like last year. Well, 2023 then happened, and boy, was I very wrong about these Carolina Panthers, because what could go wrong exactly went wrong for these Panthers. Just about everything you could have possibly imagined went very wrong for Carolina. Bryce Young was very bad in his rookie season. He tried, but failed to get past his terrible offensive line. He was like one of, if not the most pressured quarterback in the league. He had a terrible supporting cast outside of Adam Thielen. And I mean, of course, he had his own struggles. We just can't blame the supporting cast. He had his own struggles of not getting past his first read, struggling with turnovers, getting sacked frequently. I mean, even when his offensive line gave him a little bit of protection. But then he had other things revolving against him. The offseason investment of running back Miles Sanders from the Eagles, it was a very bad one. His production went way down, averaging at 800 yards in Philadelphia in 4 seasons, and then he cut that in half in his 1 season in Carolina. That's bad. That is really bad. And he really underperformed beyond the stats. And then Frank Reich's development of his quarterback and his management of the offense were so good, he got fired by week 12. Yeah, Ouch. I mean, the only win that they got was against the Houston Texans when they were coming off a bye around midseason. But just like still, this team was like severely bad. It was just that terrible. And it's got to a point where it was so bad that the owner, David Tepper, was also getting himself into trouble. He was caught on camera like towards the end of the season in that Week 17 shutout loss against the Jaguars, throwing a drink at a Jags fan, showing how all elite he was, proving his loyalty to Tony Khan, C-O-N, by throwing a drink on a Jags fan. Or maybe he was a plant by Noseman, Triple H, to go throw a drink against an AEW fan. I don't know. But I mean, not like for all the bad shit that happened for Carolina in 2023, there were at least some bright side. There's at least a very few bright spots for the Panthers this year. One of their 2 wins in this season at least had an impact. At least had an impact on the playoff picture. And that came in the form of the Week 15 win against the Falcons. The Falcons were still, by that point, in contention of the NFC South because, yes, it was that crappy. And that win against the Falcons ended up costing Atlanta both the NFC South and, well, head coach Arthur Smith his job. So, and in essence, it not only helped, I don't know if it helped Carolina in a sense, but, I mean, it also helped Arthur Smith and Atlanta in a sense. So, Carolina at least did something. They at least managed to have a little bit of hope. And then defensive tackle Derek Brown, he was probably the lone bright spot on that defense, being the most consistent positive from their badly coached defense. Brown was a tackling machine. He at least knew how to get the key stops when necessary, and he was a Pro Bowl. He earned himself a Pro Bowl nod. So, I mean, there was at least a few positive things in this season. I mean, it was mostly bad, but not everything was terrible. But still, they went 2-15. But yeah, to say it was a very terrible year, to say it was a mostly bad year, it's an understatement. Like when you look at the highlights on YouTube, this Panthers team was very unwatchable, both on and off the field, and it really showed. It really showed. Not only did this terrible season get Frank Reich fired, and like not even after the season ended, like well before the season ended, but it also got general manager Scott Fitter fired. 5 years in Carolina, and well, this is what he had to show for it. And let's face it, he deserved it after getting swindled by the Bears for what ended up being a crappy pre-draft trade. You know, all those like first and second round picks, and then also having to give up DJ Moore too to Chicago, your number 1 receiver. So yeah, and it's yeah, no wonder why Bryce Young was like handed shit. He had no top receiver. Good job. So, an owner that was that's now on his way to claim the title as the worst because, you know, Dan Snyder's not there anymore. If not already, you know, you have to wonder whoever's going to be the new head coach and general manager is going to have that tall task of trying to rebuild this team to respectability with an owner that's, well, full micromanagement. So, David Tepper went on to hire Bucs offensive coordinator Dave Canales as his head coach. He did a pretty good job resurrecting Baker Mayfield in 2023. But now whether he can do the same with Bryce Young remains to be seen. Tepper also went on to promote assistant general manager Dan Morgan to general manager and president of football operations. So at least for Dan Morgan, he has some familiarity within the organization as both a player and as an executive. But now let's see if Tepper will let him put together a proper roster without any sort of micromanagement from his end. So looking at their offseason, currently as it stands, they have around $36 million in cap space. So it's something, but in the grand scheme of things, it's kind of also not a lot. At least it's better than the other teams that we're going to be talking about. So they do pick at number 1, but oh wait, they gave that away. They gave that away to the Chicago Bears last year to go and get Bryce Young. And they don't pick till round 2. Oh, wow. Smart decision there, Carolina. And by then, they'll only have 6 picks to work with. Yeah, good job. Good trade there. Fortunately for them, though, they don't have a lot of key free agents that they have to deal with. The only ones that they have to deal with is linebackers Brian Burns and Shaq Thompson. So I feel like that should be a priority for them to keep those two together in Carolina. Some of their team needs that they really need to address this offseason is, well, getting that number 1 receiver for Bryce Young. Obviously, it's going to be hard to do that in the draft. Well, maybe they might find a gem in round 2. But regardless, you cannot have an old yet reliable Adam Thielen as his only go-to receiver. You got to find a big name that can truly help Young unlock his potential. And, of course, you got to find protection, too. Speaking of protection, the offensive line. It was another reason why the offense struggled big time, because the overall blocking up front was so bad. So they got to find some upgrades at guard and even at tackle in the draft. Maybe they could get lucky in free agency as well. And then, like I said, you got to re-sign Brian Burns. It's a no-brainer. He's been a consistent cog of that defense. And long-term, they got to lock him up. I know there's been rumors and speculation that they're going to franchise tag him, but the best thing they could do is sign him long-term. So for the Carolina Panthers, they have serious, like dead-ass serious work to do in the offseason if they want to begin an actual rebuild, both on and off the field. Just as long David Tepper's ass doesn't get involved, like hands-on with the new regime's like work. But man, even with whatever they do this offseason, like the list is abundant. Their needs are abundant. 36 million cap space, only 6 picks to work with in the draft. It's probably not enough to address their biggest needs going into next season. So good luck to Dan Morgan and Dave Canales trying to deal with this mess, because, boy, they're going to need it. So that's 1 down, 30 more to go. Woo! We're getting off to a great start here on NFL Season Recap Month 2023. But that being said, let's talk about our second team here in our Season Recap Part 1, and that's taking a trip down to the nation's capital to talk about the Washington Commanders. It was just more than just a change at quarterback for Washington that they went through in the last year. Sure, they elected to go with second-year, 5th-round pick Sam Darnold, who was drafted in 2022. They went with him as the starter, see what they can offer, but it was actually just more than that. During this past offseason in July of 2023, notorious owner Dan Snyder sold the team to an investment group led by Josh Harris, who was known more from the Philadelphia 76ers. And once that got finalized, the season became one of keep or delete for 2024 for the Commanders. So I noted in my preview for the Commanders that they still had some talent on this team. Don't get me wrong, but then once the season rolled along, several things became apparent with such talent that led them to go from 2-0 to start the season to all the way down to 4-13 once the season ended. So you have to look at what went wrong with the Commanders throughout this whole season. And sure, like the Commanders got off to a good start because their defense and all that, but the main problem, the crux, was Sam Howell. Sam Howell was really bad. Howell was just not good this season because he turned the ball over a lot. He was really careless throwing interceptions or just fumbling it on the run. But here's a caveat. I know people love to talk shit. They love to like crap on Sam Howell because of those things. But there's kind of a bit of a caveat to Sam Howell's issues. And I'm not saying that these are excuses for Howell. He played behind the worst offensive line in the NFL. Like not everything why Sam Howell was bad was because of him. It is because, that offensive line was just terrible. It was so bad. They gave up over 60 sacks, like nearing close to 70. He was the most sacked quarterback in the NFL. He was like nearing David Carr levels of getting sacked. he was pressured up the ass instantly. Like, if he was just like 1 second from the snap, you already have pass rushes going up after him on a weekly basis. Every play, he was getting harassed. Washington didn't do an adequate job putting together at least a decent O-line for quarterback under evaluation. And look what happened. Sam Howell was pretty bad. And people were too quick to point out that Sam Howell was the problem, when in essence that it wasn't always because of him. It was like the main crux was that offensive line. Like, just like with a couple of other teams that we're going to talk about. The main issue is that they don't protect their quarterbacks. Washington was one of them. And it wasn't just the offense that was the main issue. I mean, look at the defense. It was really bad. This defense was just as bad. Like, all season, like a team that once had one of the best defense in the league, like most recently a couple of years ago, it turned into one of the worst. But the main problem was with this defense is that it was a secondary that allowed way too many explosive plays due to their inability to keep up with various receivers, and they just really lacked communication. They really lacked chemistry with each other. And then once they traded away Montez Sweat to the Bears and then Chase Young to the Niners, there was no pass rush. There was like no pass rush anymore, aside from Jonathan Allen and Daron Payne in the interior. But on the exterior, that was gone. Like, those two couldn't do it alone. So, yeah, it was just the pass rush simply wasn't there anymore. And all this culminated in them constantly getting whooped in the butt, and defensive coordinator Jack Del Rio getting fired after Thanksgiving, after that ass whooping by the Cowboys. But not everything was bad with the Commanders and during this evaluation season, because when you look at the rookie class, there was some promise. There was some promise. Like running back Chris Rodriguez Jr., he received an increase in production midway through the season. And, despite only a handful of carries, he made the most of them, looking more like a power and energetic back than Antonio Gibson. And surprisingly, Brian Robinson Jr. I was a little surprised, for example, watching that during that game against when the 49ers played the Commanders. There's a little bit of mix of Chris Rodriguez. I think Chris Rodriguez played in that game against the 49ers. There's a good heavy mix of Chris Rodriguez and Brian Robinson Jr. And Antonio Gibson was there too. But it was kind of crazy when you think about it. But Rodriguez played pretty well for himself, despite only having limited snaps. Someone could correct me if I'm wrong on that Niners game, by the way. But also you have defensively corner Emmanuel Forbes. He struggled for much of the year while adjusting to the league. He got actually benched at one point. But once you saw the defense losing a lot of players due to injury, Forbes, once he had to get into a starting position, he was playing much better. He allowed just a little over 200 yards, so a better, reasonable, better stat than what he previously did early in the season. So a little less than 200 yards in 9 games. So a much better improvement for him. So another positive was that they still have a top receiver in Terry McLaurin. Sam Howell really helped him out despite a receiving game that was really kind of lacking. And Terry McLaurin still proved that he can be one of the best if he had a good quarterback. And then the team, now that the season is over with, they can finally begin a new change in the guard. No more Dan Snyder. No more Ron Rivera. They could finally clean house and, well, maybe a new quarterback too. I don't know. Either way, like now they can start fresh. They can start a new clean slate. So for the Commanders, yeah, 4-13. It definitely may have sucked for that team, and Howell probably wasn't the answer that they were looking for. Or maybe it could be if they keep him around. I don't know. But considering that with that new ownership in Josh Harris, new general manager in Adam Peters, head coach Ron Rivera got shown the door in favor of Cowboys defensive coordinator Dan Quinn, who has had experience as a head coach in Atlanta. They're looking like a very solid attraction right now in the league. So if all three can nail this offseason, ongoing right now, then the Commanders can take step one in righting the ship that Dan Snyder completely sunk for decades. So looking at their offseason, they have the most cap space in the league. So they have the most money, the most dinero to spend, around $82 million. And they do pick at number 2. So they have options here. Depending on what the Bears do at number 1, they're going to get either the top pick, the top choice at quarterback, or the second best choice. Whoever they want, whatever the Bears don't get, the Commanders will get. That's unless if they trade down, which it would be a curious choice as well. Looking at some of their key free agents, lucky for them, not too many that they have to consider re-signing or extending. Looking at, just for example, though, center Tyler Larson, linebackers Cody Barton and David Mayo. The only one that they should consider re-signing, though, is safety Cameron Curl. He had a really good year in a what was considered a overall down year for the team. But looking at the needs to address for the entire team overall, excuse me, obviously that number 2 overall pick has to be centered around drafting the quarterback. So as much as I think Sam Howell should be given another chance with a proper offensive line, I think Adam Peters and Dan Quinn are likely going to instead want their own quarterback with the opportunity in front of them. I mean, it's like a golden opportunity. With how bad the team did. I mean, not by fault of their own, but it's just, by circumstance. You have the number 1, 2 overall pick. It's like sitting right in front of you. You got to use it. You got to use it on what you think is a prime opportunity to have a franchise quarterback. Whatever that may be, go and use it. And then from there, you build around that quarterback. Build a wall to protect them. Rebuild the offensive line, starting with the tackle position. Outside of guard Sam Cosmi, the offensive line, like I said, was a big mess, allowing a crap ton of sacks on Sam Howell. You don't want that on your next quarterback. They need to commit a good amount of their free agency and draft capital on the offensive line, and that starts with tackle. And then defensively, you got to rebuild the defense, starting with the secondary. Washington had the worst pass defense this past season, so addressing cornerback should be at the top of the list. In terms of their defense, Dan Quinn's a specialist in that, so he'll probably know what to do. And then from there, they can split getting edge rushers in both free agency and the draft, and maybe some, whatever pending need that they have to get as well. And then, of course, you have to re-sign standout free agent safety, like I said, Cameron Curl. So that's another top priority that they have to address at that defense. So as I said, Washington didn't exactly have a great 2023 by no means. So as the season wore on for them, it was expected under the new ownership. But now that new ownership can officially kick it to overdrive. It can go into full gear, start a new revolution. And those AEW terms are really kicking in, huh? So it's a new one with new head coach in Dan Quinn, new general manager Adam Peters, new ownership in Josh Harris. They got a lot of money to spend. Probably a good amount of draft capital too. So just as long as they're allowed to do it the right way, I think the Commanders can make some big moves as long as they do it right this coming offseason. Now we depart from the nation's capital to go up north to Foxborough, Massachusetts, to talk about the Patriot way that is the New England Patriots. The New England Patriots in 2022, they had themselves a tough season. Mac Jones regressed without a true offensive coordinator. So as such, they were heading into this past season, 2023, looking to turn it around in what could possibly been Bill Belichick's last dance. Although, looking at it in retrospect, in terms of their offseason, they didn't really do a whole lot. Belichick, outside of adding an actual offensive coordinator in Bill O'Brien, who has familiarity with the New England system, Bill Belichick, the general manager, didn't add much else to help out his quarterback that he drafted so many years ago, which was technically 2 years ago. So not too long ago. He didn't add much else. And with a tough schedule ahead, the Patriots looked like to be in serious trouble. And I didn't have a lot of high hopes for that. So as such, a lot of things went wrong for the Patriots. And a lot wrong than expected. So Mac Jones, he fell apart. Like he felt like a probably a lot more apart than he did in 2022. So that was coupled with the offensive line, the lack of an offensive line, and a proper receiving cast. Yeah, surely played a role in it. But in fairness, Mac Jones also deserves his fair share of the blame. He threw a ton of ill-advised balls, even when not under pressure. He turned it over a ton, including someone in the pocket. I mean, look at some of Mac Jones' throws, and he was just throwing it dead in the right of a defender, like in front of a cornerback. It's like, man, like it's that bad. So that kept going on for like a couple weeks, and then eventually it came to a point where Bill Belichick benched him 4 times during the season. Like, that's a lot. That kills his confidence, as if it was already down enough. And he saw the bench for good at halftime. Like, there was even a point in time where he was on the inactive list. And he saw the inactive list for good, as I said, in week 11. And then when you look at the quarterback position, Bailey Zappi was no better. That quarterback that saw raves in the 2022 season as well. Yeah, Bailey Zappi was no better, and the Patriots made it clear that they were going to turn back to their former first-round pick that they drafted just 2 years ago. And it's really disappointing when you look at it. It just went to show that, man, Mac Jones is like a serious bust. But it's outside of Mac Jones, though. The offense was really dreadful, whoever was at quarterback. I mean, I've already pointed out the quarterback troubles with Jones and Bailey Zappi, who, again, was not that much better, but still bad. Again, there's more issues than that. Tight end Hunter Henry, rookie Demario Douglas, the receiver, they had good seasons, but the rest of the offense was very flawed. The rushing attack of Ramondre Stevenson and the newest addition, Ezekiel Elliott, they didn't amount to much, so that forced the Patriots to throw the ball more. The offensive line was one of the most pressured in the league, which led to either quarterback getting sacked or forced into turnovers. Now, you combine all that, and it was an offense that could score very few points, or in a couple occasions, they couldn't score at all. And those shutouts, all of them occurred at home. That is embarrassing, especially to a team that has rarely done that under the Tom Brady regime. And to do that, I think it's like twice or 3 times in 1 year. Oof, that's bad. That is really bad. But for all their faults, there's some things that can be attributed to as a positive, like their defense. Their defense has been and always been Bill Belichick's bread and butter. That unit that kept the team alive in games against contenders like the Dolphins, the Eagles, the Chiefs, the Bills. Speaking of the Bills, the Patriots managed to get one of their wins against that team like midway through the season, so it wasn't all that bad. And you look at safety Jabril Peppers. He could be considered the MVP of that defense, if not the whole team, because of how well he played in coverage against opposing receivers, and he was a pretty good run defender for a defense that was heralded by not just Bill Belichick, by his son as well. And then look at rookie corner Christian Gonzalez. He looked primed for a good season with how well he played in coverage. It was just very unfortunate that he was lost very early in the season with 2 season-ending injuries. That's just rough. So, it's pretty much your defense. That has been very good. Everything else, though, is just like, man, it's just brutal. It was just painful to watch as they struggled to a 4-13 record. So, not as brutal, though, of an ending for a way to go out for longtime head coach Bill Belichick, because, he parted ways with the Patriots. Like, they came to a mutual decision to, hey, might as well cut the olive branch now, say our formal goodbyes now. So, yeah, it's officially the end of an era. So, along with Tom Brady, they led them to a dynasty of 6 Super Bowls. But, man, after Tom Brady left for Tampa Bay, it's been a sinking ship since then. So, yeah, he mutually parted ways with New England the Thursday after the season ended. And, well, he's looking for his next journey. I don't think he's coaching anytime soon until probably next year. The Patriots, they found their immediate successor in former Patriots player and current linebackers coach, Jared Mayo. So Jared Mayo, he has a a tall task on his hand. He has some tall shoes to fill that Bill Belichick left behind. So, at least for Jared Mayo, and I don't think they named a general manager at all, but someone's filling that position. But nonetheless, they have some decent things that are going for them in the offseason. They have around $77 million in cap space, so plenty of money to spend. So that's something. And they get the 3rd overall pick. So by losing all those games, they now are in prime position to do what they want with it. Do they want a quarterback, or do they want to trade down, get a bunch of picks, and then go for what the best available need is? Looking at some of their key free agents, not too concerning. Any concerning ones, like tight end Hunter Henry and Mike Gesicki, who barely even played at all this year. Running back Ezekiel Elliott, safeties Jalen Mills and Kyle Duggar, and then linebacker Josh Uche. I'm not really sure who you would really re-sign out of all of them. Maybe Kyle Duggar, maybe. So looking at some of their team needs that they really need to address this offseason, I think the number one priority is that quarterback position. You got to make a decision on what you got to do at the most important position of the game. Do you want to give Mac Jones one last chance to show what he's got? I mean, yes, he's had 2 crappy seasons since he came into the league, like after his very solid rookie season. But then everything after that just rapidly started going down a hill. So do you want to give him one more shot? Probably with a proper offensive coordinator that can really help him out, and a younger head coach that can truly give him a chance? Or do you use the 3rd overall pick to, get that quarterback that will be under a head coach that probably wants their own QB, but nonetheless, Jared Mayo has to make a decision at the quarterback position. Do you go with Mac Jones, or do you get your own quarterback? And then once you decide on that, you got to find a number 1 receiver in the draft. You got to rebuild that supporting cast around that quarterback, and that starts in the receiver position. So, rookie Demario Douglas, he played well, but I mean, obviously more help is needed at the position. I'm not too sure if Demario Douglas can be that number 1 guy on the receiving end, but you might as well use one of your draft picks to go and get a guy that you could scout and then draft later on when the day comes, especially a top one, because that Patriots receiving core is really lacking. And then you got to commit to building the offensive line. After having such a stout offensive line that protected Tom Brady all those years, and then Mac Jones' first year, the Patriots' offensive line has significantly turned for the worse. Cole Strange has been a big bust, strangely, no pun intended, while other linemen, Trent Brown and Mike Onwenu, they're free agents. So I feel like it's time to fully reset the entire offensive line, so proper protection can be in place for their quarterback. So very brutal way for the Patriots Bill Belichick era to end. But now they got to enter in this new era where with the new regime of Jared Mayo and a yet to be decided general manager, if they ever put in one. But that's besides the point. They're entering this new regime that's going to be tasked with rebuilding a broken empire from the ground up. So a lot of decisions have to be made going into the offseason. And, well, decision number 1 is going to be that quarterback decision. Go with Mac Jones or pick a quarterback at number 3. The Patriot way is going to be some interesting ways starting in a couple weeks. Going to the halfway point of our 2023 NFL season recaps part 1. What do you guys think about the teams that we talked about so far? We've talked about the Panthers, we talked about the Commanders, and we talked about the Patriots, which we just wrapped up. What do you guys think about their 2023? What are your needs for them if you're a fan of either of these teams? And yeah, let me know your own thoughts on either of the 3 teams that we talked about so far. But now let's move on to the second part of our NFL season recaps part 1 and take a trip down to the desert to talk about the Dirty Birds in red, and that is the Arizona Cardinals. Not too many expectations I set, and many have set for them, because in 2023, they're going in with a new head coach in Jonathan Gannon, but they're not going to be with their starting quarterback for at least half of the year, because he was recovering from a serious late season injury the year prior, because after they dumped head coach Cliff Kingsbury, rightfully so, like I said, they hired former Eagles defensive coordinator Jonathan Ganna, who was fresh off the Super Bowl, but he was in for a very tall task, trying to put together a decent roster that didn't have a lot of cap space, and I don't believe they had a lot of draft capital either, I remember at the time. And they were going to be set without starting quarterback Kyler Murray for at least half of the season because he was recovering from a torn ACL that he suffered in December of 2022. So that was going to be a while before they can get their starting QB back. So this season was mainly all about developing the young players that were on the roster, be it already there, acquired through the draft, free agency, while they were biding time for Kyler Murray to return. Now, obviously, the stretch without Kyler Murray was pretty rough. I mean, that's not to say all the games were bad without Kyler Murray, because a little surprisingly, the fill-in quarterback, Joshua Dobbs, he had the offense functioning and somewhat competitive in some games. But it became clear, after like a little past halfway throughout his tenure there, his limitations being a journeyman quarterback, along with the rest of the low talent gap on the team, were a reason why Arizona suffered a lot offensively without Murray. And, eventually, it started to cave in. So that stretch without Kyler Murray, sure, it was a little surprising at first, but then eventually it just started to cave. And then all season long, that defense, it was just really bad. A top 10 worst. Not all time, obviously, but top 10 worst during this season. There were a few positive producers like linebackers Chris Barnes and Kaiser White, as well as safety Buda Baker and Jonathan Ledbetter at rusher. Arizona, but man, they had difficulty stopping the ball at just every chance they got, because they just couldn't get to the quarterback. They couldn't stop the run. They had a lot of difficulty playing defense, and they got scored on. That's why they got scored on a lot. So Arizona really struggled on both ends because they were just lacking in a lot of key areas. But once Kyler Murray came back, they played a little bit better. Returning from an ACL tear in Week 10, Murray picked up where he left off, and he performed pretty well despite a lack of weapons other than Greg Dortch and Trey McBride, both of them tight ends. Murray playing pretty mobile despite having that ACL tear. Made some solid explosive plays to keep games close, and even won at least one of them. So 3 of the 4 wins from Arizona came against playoff contenders. So yeah, it may have been a down year overall for the Cardinals, but they had some wild stunners that nobody expected, like the Cowboys in Week 3 with Josh Dobbs under center. Nobody expected them to win that game against Dallas with that tough defense and with Prescott at home. Man. And then, of course, you had the Steelers. I mean, that wasn't really a surprise, but the biggest surprise came against the Philadelphia. They were the biggest underdog that week, probably in the whole season. And they actually went on to stun them, literally stun them. And that win against Philadelphia caused a ripple effect in the NFC playoff picture. It caused the Niners to get the number 1 seed. The Eagles dropped down all the way to the number 5 seed, permanently. And yeah, it basically gave the Cowboys the NFC East, right then and there. So yeah, Arizona, that win, sure, it may not meant anything for them, but I mean, in terms of playoffs or anything, but it gave them some confidence for going to next season. And then last but not least, the running game, really effective, despite the offense, not really doing a whole lot in the passing game. Offensive coordinator Drew Petzing emphasized the running a lot, and it was pretty effective. Led by James Conner, the Cardinals were an effective running team, getting at least 6 yards a carry each game. So that meant a lot of first downs. And that strong ground game opened the play action attack pretty well once Kyler Murray came back, especially because it allowed tight ends to get open in the middle more, and even their low level receivers to actually do decently too. So, despite given the lack of talent in the first half without Kyler Murray, they did go 4-13. I mean, it was pretty expected that Arizona was going to essentially be at the same record that they were last year, if not worse. But Kyler Murray, strong return, should have both Jonathan Gannon at coach and the team hopeful for what is to come next season. Just as long as the team can get the right pieces to get themselves back on track. So you look at this offseason for the Cardinals, they have around $51 million to spend, so that's a good amount of money. They can spend this offseason, and they get 2 first-round draft picks in April with the 4th overall pick and the 27th pick that they got from Houston in that trade last year when the Texans decided to trade up to get Will Anderson. So they got something. They got something going. They got something cooking. In terms of free agents, not a lot to worry about, at all. So they got even more stuff even brewing. The only I'm not sure if they want to keep any of them, like Marquise Brown and Greg Dortch. So I don't know if they want to consider keeping them around. In terms of what they need to address in the offseason, I guess the place you want to start is rebuild the receiving room around Kyler Murray, because they never really had that true top option for either Josh Dobbs or Kyler Murray. They tried with Marquise Hollywood Brown, but ever since he left Baltimore, they traded for him. I guess they never really got it going. So they're going to need a new number 1 receiver to go alongside Murray and standout tight end Trey McBride. They're probably going to draft that one guy they keep talking about, Marvin Harrison Jr. So they're probably going to go with that guy. And then with the 27th overall pick, that's up to them. Maybe either draft a defensive tackle or an offensive lineman, whatever is at their disposal, because they do have weaknesses on both sides of the trenches. But they're going to have to pick or choose which one to address at that point. I mean, yeah, they can use free agency to do that, but they should think the long game here. I do think, though, they need to show up that run defense, but they also have to add to the interior as well. And then staying on the defense, they need to find a cornerback to help the secondary, because the passing defense was really bad. So Jonathan Gannon and the front office, they have to find a lockdown corner in free agency, or maybe a diamond in the rough in the draft. So yeah, Arizona's 2023 went mostly expected, but again, bright sides. You gotta look at the bright side to it. You got Kyler Murray back. You got a good amount of money to spend. If there's some solid draft capital there, I mean, you have 2 first-round picks this year in the draft. So this offseason is going to be a good opportunity for Arizona to regroup, build around their quarterback. If they do it right, hell, they could be back in contention for a playoff spot, and who knows, maybe the division in 2024. So now we go from the desert to the bright powder blue lights of Hollywood to talk about the clip. Sorry, I got the little coughs, the little clip clops there. To talk about the Los Angeles Chargers. The powder blue bolts in Los Angeles, they had plenty to answer for this past season after what had transpired a year prior, like actually over a year prior. So in case you were wondering what exactly happened in January of last year, so back in the first round of the 2022 NFL playoffs, or 2023, whatever you want to call it, the Chargers, they held a 28-0 second quarter lead over the all-elite Jacksonville Jaguars before eventually, just like they always love to do, then they loved to Charger it away in humiliating fashion. So they gave up a 28-0 lead. They let it slip away, and they lost that game. Despite that, though, owner Dean Spanos kept head coach Brandon Staley around for unknown reasons. Like, why? I was really questioning, like, why the hell you decided to keep Brandon Staley around when the dude lost a big ass lead like that, and you of course. Well, what more to expect, huh? So anyway, all that aside, you head into a season. Staley was tasked to figure out how to get back into the playoff hunt and how not to clipper it again like he did last time out. But unfortunately for the Chargers, that didn't pan out. None of it panned out because they suffered some key injuries during this season. Mainly some 2 key injuries that was going to plummet the Chargers offense. I mean, looking at the Chargers season, they started off pretty bad. They were already 0-2 when they traveled to Minnesota on the back end of a 2-game road trip, going into week 3. They won that game in Minnesota, but they paid a big price in that game because they wound up losing one of their top receivers early in the season in Mike Williams. Mike Williams already had a sketchy health history, but that's not the point. His loss was going to end up being a very big one for the offense, which had to rely heavily on Keenan Allen. And on the other side, there wasn't really a reliable number 2 for Justin Herbert to go to. So that offense was really, really struggling hard. It became even less explosive. But then once week 14 rolled around, that's when it started to get even worse. The Chargers went on to lose Justin Herbert for the year to a fractured finger in his throwing hand in the first quarter of that game against Denver. Talk about major L, because once they rolled with backup Easton Stick, the offense sank even more, starting with an embarrassing Thursday night stinker against the Raiders that came 4 days later. Yeah, it was that bad. So, if you want to talk about the offense even further, look at running back Austin Eckler. His production dipped. Eckler headed into this season coming off contract extensions that broke down, and it looked like, considering how that went, it looked like he was going to be motivated to prove them wrong, that, oh, you should have paid me a good amount of money. But instead, he proved the Chargers front office right, that, no, we're not going to pay you. We're not going to give you the money that you want. Because Austin Eckler was not as effective in both rushing and receiving as he had been the last 2 years. And he actually managed to turn the ball over more than he scored. So for the Chargers running game, it was ineffective. It was nearly ineffective. And then, of course, you have the season-long usual tradition of clippering. Chargering. For those of you that really rag on me for saying clippering, because, well, face it, the Chargers are like the Clippers. They love to choke it up. They're like brother and sister. I think it's safe to say, because the Chargers are in Los Angeles now, so they're like the little brother to the Clippers, and they're gonna be in the same vicinity of each other starting later this year when the Clippers go to the Intuit Dome. How isn't that convenient? now they can have sleepovers together. Sorry, not sidetracking. But of course it wouldn't be the Chargers without the annual tradition of clippering away a good amount of games that they want. They could have won. I mean, yeah, it's one thing to get into a shootout with the Lions and the Dolphins, but then you blow leads to the Titans, the Packers, and the Bills. It's like, come on, man. You can't. I guess it's the never-ending tradition of the Chargers. Sorry, but I mean, it wasn't all bad. It wasn't all bad for the Chargers, because you had at least 2 standout players on this team, and in a season full of struggle, and that was Khalil Mack and Keenan Allen. Because of those injuries or underperformances on both sides of the ball, someone had to step up, especially considering their head coach sucking ass. Linebacker Khalil Mack was one of them. He had a return to form, if you could say that, this past year with a career-high 17 sacks. He even had that 6-sack game on Aiden O'Connell of the Raiders at home early in the season. And meanwhile, on offense, the already mentioned injury to Mike Williams forced Keenan Allen to step up. And he did such in a big way. Over a 1,000-yard receiving season and 7 touchdowns in 13 games that he started all year. It was a little unfortunate that his season was cut short with a heel injury, but he was the de facto number 1 receiver that kept the offense somewhat functioning. And another positive for this Chargers team was that, well, They cut the snake off the head off the snake. They fired general manager Tom Telesco and head coach Brandon Staley after week 15. Now, obviously, the bigger head of the snake is Dean Spanos, but I mean, obviously, you can't get rid of him because, well, he's the owner. But anyway, the Chargers didn't just get blown out in that Amazon Prime game for $15.99 a month in Las Vegas in week 15. They were embarrassed. They were clippered to oblivion, getting shut out at 48-0 before a final score of 63-21. So Dean Spanos, he made the move that he should have made back in January of last year. So, I mean, yeah, if it was too little, too late. I mean, but at least he made the move finally. So the Chargers ended their season 5-12. They had their usual tradition of chargering winnable games. And it was made even worse once Justin Herbert went down to injury. But the silver lining in all this, to this crappy season, is that once Dean Spanos finally smartened up and fired Brandon Staley and Tom Telesco, he hired an actual coach with actual success, with winning, and that was both in college and the NFL, and was fresh off of winning a college football national championship. And that was Jim Harbaugh. So he actually made a good move for once. So joining Jim Harbaugh was new general manager Jim Horwitz, who previously served as the Baltimore Ravens director of player personnel. And looking at 1 month later from the major decision, who knows? Who knows what the Chargers will be able to do? Maybe they'll finally break that curse of clippering, or maybe they'll just be the same old Chargers. This offseason. So looking at their offseason, they have around, they're still in the red. So Jim Harbaugh and Jim Horwitz have some work to do. They're over $25 million above the cap. So they got to make some decisions on who to get rid of or who to restructure. So some decisions to be made if they want to get under the cap and they want to spend in free agency and their own draft class. So, speaking of the draft, they have the 5th overall pick. So, a good spot to see who they want to get. Looking at some of their key free agents, obviously one of them is Austin Eckler. Something to consider if they want to keep him around. Receiver Jalen Guyen, a reserve receiver. Linebacker Kenneth Murray, and then backup quarterback Easton Stick, who, didn't do all that bad, but it's just that, he could produce on offense. Looking at some of the needs to address this offseason, like I said, you got to get under the salary cap first. That new regime of Horwitz and Harbaugh, they have that first tall task of having to undo some of the previous general manager, Tom Telesco's dirty work. That includes his financial decision-making. They got to get under the money line if they want to get help, let alone draft anyone, whether that be restructuring or releasing some players that have big, fat contracts. So they got to get under the money line first. And then you got to get some help in the secondary, especially some help for corner Asante Samuel Jr., because that man cannot do it alone. Especially considering that, they got J.C. Jackson, I think it was like last offseason or this past offseason, and man, he did not pan out. Sadly, a very disappointing acquisition. So they're going to have to once again find some help with Asante Samuel Jr., go and get at least 2 cornerbacks in the draft. And, yeah, hopefully it'll be the answer. And then you got to find some upgrades on the offensive line. The offensive line was actually a surprise weakness this past year, especially on the right side. So they got to draft both a guard and a tackle to help out Corey Linsley and just protect Justin Herbert's blind side. And then you got to decide what to do at running back. Running back Austin Eckler, he's been the focal point of the offense for the last 2 years. But like I said, he really disappointed this past season with just 6 overall touchdowns and his performance not matching the ones in years past. So as the debate rolls on whether running backs should be paid a ton, Harbaugh and Horwitz need to decide how to address the position, whether it's bringing back Austin Eckler or going with someone else. So the Chargers, they did Chargers things in 2023. But if you look at the bright side, they probably did the deed of firing their head coach and the general manager at the right time. Now in comes in Jim Harbaugh, fresh off a national championship, and a general manager with some good experience in Baltimore and Jim Horwitz. Now, as long as they're allowed to fix the mess their way under Dean Spanos, the Powder Blue siblings, well, it depends on what they're able to do, but they can allowed to do what they need to do. They can leave 2023 in the dust. To wrap up part 1 of our 2023 NFL season recaps, we travel from the Powder Blue side of Los Angeles as we go now to the Big Blue side of New York to talk about none other than the New York Giants. The Giants, they were coming off a season where they exceeded their own expectations. They overexceeded, in other words, by making the playoffs with a pretty flawed roster, and they're going into 2023 with the expectation of, well, trying to do it again. And they made an interesting choice in this offseason during this point last year, because they had to come to make a decision between the two key players. Daniel Jones at quarterback, Saquon Barkley at running back. They had to make a decision on, well, which one do we give the big fat contract to? So they made that interesting decision to give that big fat contract to Daniel Jones. And then they decided to franchise tag running back Saquon Barkley. Franchise tag him. So then after, they had themselves what I thought was a good draft, and by need. So basically drafting the best available player. So going in, I thought the Giants would have themselves a solid season, just as long as they could get the same Daniel Jones they got in 2022, minus the turnovers. Unfortunately, the season for the New York Giants in 2023, it went south from the very beginning. Like literally just minutes into week 1. They got their butts whooped. Actually, not just whooped by the Dallas Cowboys in the opener, but completely blanketed, embarrassed, soaked in the rain on prime time. You saw an opening drive filled with some promise and a complete disaster. False start by the offensive line. Botched snap by the center that led to a big sack. And then you have Graham Gano trying to make a field goal in the rain, and then it gets blocked and get returned for a big touchdown. That set the tone for what ended up becoming the center of the many problems for Big Blue all season long. They got shut out, and sure, they get a comeback win over Arizona in week 2, but it doesn't get any better. It didn't fix the problems that the Giants had going forward. And one of those problems was the horrific, the absolutely shitty offensive line. The pass blocking was so bad, they averaged 6 or more sacks per game. Like, whoever was at quarterback, they had no time to throw. They were under duress all day long. The poor pass protection led to heavy pressure on Daniel Jones in the pocket and forced him to run for his life when he didn't need to. I think it was the same case it was in 2022, just amped up to the max. But it also led to more turnovers, some of which led to touchdowns, like in the week 1 game. And it only got worse as the season wore on, with injuries, including to their quarterback. So at one point, Daniel Jones got injured, but actually let's reverse course. Daniel Jones was inconsistent, and he was eventually gone. And why do I say gone? Well, let's first start with why Daniel Jones was inconsistent, actually. Even with the small amount of protection time that Daniel Jones got, Daniel Jones was, again, inconsistent. He couldn't connect with either of his receiving core, and even without pressure in his face, still turned it over, like dead in the right to a corner, linebacker, whatnot. He made wrong reads in general. So why do I say he was gone? Well, he suffered a neck injury in that Miami game. And then when he came back for the Raiders, he was gone permanently for the season with a torn ACL on a non-contact run. So a very rough way for Daniel Jones' season to end early, but he regressed. And it gave New York some reason to go and get another quarterback, potentially this offseason. So you had a door of quarterbacks like Tyrod Taylor and Danny DeVito. And Danny DeVito, surprisingly, had this whole spotlight on him. Like, oh, he's like Tommy DeVito. No, he wasn't really. But then it was just like for 1 week. And then it went to Tyrod Taylor. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it for the Giants quarterback. But nonetheless, Daniel Jones was just like, oof. But for all Big Blue's problems, when you look at what went right for the Giants, you look at Dexter Lawrence. The defense, yes, it was atrocious as hell. But when you look at a bright spot on this defense, Dexter Lawrence was a force to be reckoned with at defensive tackle. He was a freaking force at pressure, getting to the quarterback, in tackling in short distances, including his standout game against the Jets in Week 8. He finished the season as an All-Pro and as a Pro Bowler with 4.5 sacks, 7 tackles for loss, and overall 32 tackles. So pretty impressive stuff for Dexter Lawrence. And, stats alone, stats beside, he was a very effective player for that defense, which was, again, pretty terrible. And then you look at the wins. Yes, most of them came against crappy teams, but 2 of those wins were actually very surprising and kind of impressive, if you ask me. If there were any highlight wins in their 6 injury-riddled wins this season, you look at the wins over the Packers on Monday night and then the Eagles to close out the season. The Giants defense had Jordan Love and Jalen Hurts on lock. And yeah, the quarterbacks didn't have impressive performances, but Tommy DeVito against the Packers and Tyrod Taylor against Philadelphia, they did enough to pull away on offense, put the game out of reach for their team, especially DeVito leading a game-winning drive against the Packers and then get that game-winning field goal for his kicker. And then Tyrod Taylor, of course, helping his team pull away late, doing just enough. So, yeah, it was 2 good wins against 2 eventual playoff teams, especially the Eagles. They haven't gotten a win against them in forever. And then it also locked them into the 5th seed where they went on to lose in the playoffs. So they ended the season 6-11, and even if injuries eventually did them in, they were doomed from the start, with so many major flaws across the board, but none bigger than that horrifically bad offensive line that got their quarterback injured for a few games, and then Daniel Jones was eventually lost for the season with that freak ACL injury. So now they go into 2024 with many questions, the answers on that same side of the ball. So when you look at their offseason, they have about $35 million in cap space to spend. Decent amount of money, but not a lot that they can really do anything. So they got to spend it wisely unless they make some moves to get even more money. They do pick at number 6 overall. So, hey, something to spend. Make a decision at what you want to do, whether it be a lineman or receiver. I don't know. Whatever you want to pick. Look at some of the key free agents. Obviously, the one at the top of the list is Saquon Barkley. We'll talk more about him in a bit. But some of your other key free agents is corner Adoree Jackson, safety Xavier McKinley, and receiver Sterling Shepard. Maybe Adoree Jackson and Xavier McKinley are 2 names that you should consider re-signing if you're the Giants. Looking at some of the needs to address this coming offseason, which is in a couple of weeks, the number one thing that they should address is that offensive line, because Brian Daboll and Joe Chosen, the head coach and GM duo, they cannot go into 2024 expecting Daniel Jones or whoever's going to be at quarterback to get sacked more than 5 times per game again. If they do that, it is atrocious. That is a fireable offense. Their main priority of both this free agency and the draft should be upgrading the guard, the center, the right tackle spots, and provide their quarterback ample protection to throw that ball. And if protection breaks down, like in more than 10 seconds, then okay, then you can run. But the main priority is getting whoever's going to be at quarterback absolute protection. And then you got to decide what you got to do with Saquon Barkley. Their top running back is an upcoming free agent. They're not going to franchise tag him because it's going to be too expensive. So they have to decide if you want to commit to Saquon Barkley long term or if you're going to go in a different direction. And they got to make the decision real soon. And this is probably not going to happen, but I would consider, if you're the Giants, grabbing a young quarterback to compete with Daniel Jones. While it wasn't necessarily Jones' fault for the Giants' struggle in 2023, I mean, he didn't necessarily move the needle either. He still has his glaring flaws, such as reading defenses, turning the ball over frequently, and he's also coming off a torn ACL injury that happened midway through the season. Like, not like very late in the season, but still, like, it's a pretty significant injury. So rather than adding a veteran, maybe consider signing or drafting a younger quarterback that can compete with Daniel Jones. Because, yeah, if I was Daniel Jones, I'd be on the lookout of how the Giants could handle that quarterback position going forward. So for the Giants, it was a disappointing yet kind of expected follow-up to their surprising 2022 campaign. So because of injuries and various flaws. However, they're going to have to make some serious changes and considerations on the offensive side of the ball if they want to compete this September. Because, the NFC East, which is held by the Cowboys and the Eagles, obviously it's going to be tough. But if they want to take at least themselves seriously first, they got to look at the offensive side of the ball and say, hey, we need to do something about this. So that was a wrap on part 1 of our 2023 NFL season recaps. And boy, was that place stinky. Dumpster Town, always a stinky place to visit when we talk about the teams that fell into the worst of the worst. But we talked about 6 teams that sadly entered that category, and that was the Carolina Panthers, the Washington Commanders, the New England Patriots, the Arizona Cardinals, the LA Chargers, and the New York Giants. So if you're a fan of these teams, let me know how your season went in 2023. Several months later, after the season ended, and what do you think they need to do in the offseason to have hopefully a better 2024? So we leave Dumpster Town as we wrap up part 1 of our season recaps as we go into part 2 in the next episode, as we talk about 6 more teams and their 2023 season. But for now, that is a wrap on this episode of Very Cold Lasagna. I am your filthy casual host, DylanLasagna. Thank you for tuning in to episode number 188 of this icy yet spicy sports podcast. And as always, keep that lasagna very cold in the fridge with your takes on the world of sports. Until the next one, peace out.